So, well, thank you everybody for joining us for Let's Grow. It starts here now. Let's have a warm welcome for our presenters, Matthew and Nancy Kost from the Buffalo Seed Company. And, go away.
Alrighty, everybody, good morning. Today we're going to talk about seed diversity, resiliency, and our transformation.
So we're not going to have a lot of text on the slides, but there's a few definitions we'd like to go through. So agricultural biodiversity is a broad term that includes all components of biological diversity of relevance to food and agriculture, and all components of biological diversity that constitute the agricultural ecosystems, also named agroecosystems. The variety and variability of animals, plants, and microorganisms at the genetic, species, and ecosystem level, which are necessary to sustain key functions of the agroecosystem, its structure and processes.
Diversity, the stage of being diverse, variety. Diverse is showing a great deal of variety, very different. Like, for example, all those beans are very different. Resilience is an ability to recover from or adjust easily to misfortunes or change on the climate.
Okay, so diversity is a key component of being resilient, and resiliency is a cornerstone of sustainability. So, if as we aim towards becoming more sustainable and eventually regenerative, in our local food system, it's important that we pay attention to diversity.
Currently, our food system all around the world is based on industrial monoculture. Like we can see here, there is no diversity at all.
So, as we all know, diversity can have dire consequences. A lack of diversity can have dire consequences. An example is the Irish potato famine, in the 1800s that led to extreme human population loss in Ireland. And the root cause of that was that Ireland did not have a diverse potato system. So you can see the fields over here, there's, areas where there was an infection that totally decimated the crop. And then there's another variety of potatoes over here where they were completely untouched. So, having an increase in diversity can, kind of push off some of these catastrophic problems that we faced historically.
The other example is the corn blight that happened in 1970 that caused loss on yield in the southeast of United States and moved towards northwest. And because there was a monoculture production, lacking of diversity again, and the only thing that stopped for expanding further the corn blight is the cooler weather. So diversity is a very important to be coping with different diseases or other changes.
A lot of us enjoy eating bananas, and it's kind of a similar situation in bananas. The Panama disease has been, causing problems in banana production since the 1950s and continues to do so today. And once again, the reasoning for that is that there's a lack of diversity of bananas that are grown for production. We're all pretty familiar with a single type of banana, and that leaves banana production very vulnerable as well.
All of us, we love coffee, and as also it's the main production of coffee only relies on a few varieties, and which is susceptible to coffee rust that causes big yields all around the world.
And cacao, chocolate, many of us like chocolate as well. And once again, there's a very narrow genetic base of diversity for cacao production, and it's really susceptible to frosty pod rot, and it has been since the early 1980s. And so, with growing just a few varieties of cacao, our cacao production globally is compromised as well.
So as we saw examples of like crops that not necessarily we grow them, but we consume them in our daily basis, has been the production has been in a few varieties or a few species. And also we saw a reduction on diversity in our vegetables. Like we can see here a century ago in 1903, there was like more varieties of corn, cabbage, sweet corn, which have been greatly reduced by 1983. Which leave us in a very vulnerable situation when we are losing diversity that probably we're not going to be able to recover anymore. Like imagine like how many 408 tomato varieties they were like 100 years ago. Now there are only 79, even though we see a lot of them, but we don't know how many of them we lost, and that trend is keep going that way.
In fact, the diversity of cultivated crops has declined by 75% during the 20th century, and 1/3 of today's diversity could disappear by 2050.
Here's an example of a map of the crop diversity loss in the in the Kansas City area in 1978. There was more diverse crops here. The blue means more diverse crops, and red and yellow means less. By 2012, there is a great loss of diversity. We cannot see much blue. We see a lot of yellow.
So, you know, as we've lost diversity in our food crops, there's also been a consolidation of seed companies as well. So, you know, which is, you know, this interplay of, you know, centralization versus diversification. And, you know, this loss of diversity of seed companies is also prevalent within our global system. You know, around 2000, there were, you know, you can see Monsanto had hold of a lot of different smaller companies. Syngenta and DuPont did as well. You know, these were the major players in the seed industry. And, you know, as we went into like closer to, you know, 2018, there was further consolidation within the seed companies as well. And, you know, this, you know, as a global agricultural system makes us very vulnerable when we have, you know, centralization of the seeds. And, you know, so this is kind of in sync with this, you know, needing to diversify things across all levels, you know, not just within the seeds that we grow, but within the seed companies that we, you know, we partake in purchasing from as well.
As the seed consolidation of the seed companies have been consolidation, but then also there been like a concentration of consolidation of the farms. They're like in the 1925 there was around 6 million farms. By 2002 there were only 2 million, and the size of the farms have been increased, which is actually going again. Like it's more likely these big farmers are more growing the same crop than if they're smaller farmers. And that trend continues going that way. In 2009, by 2016, the farm size averages keep increasing and the number of farms keep going down.
So, you know, I mean, we're big supporters of diversity across all levels of our reality. And, you know, so, but specifically when we're talking about agriculture, you know, agricultural diversity is absolutely key to, you know, us developing a resilient system here in the greater Kansas City area, and for us to, you know, aim towards a state of sustainability. And so Nikolai Vavilov identified the center of origins of species around the world. So there's these locations where, you know, all of our crops were domesticated from wild species by, you know, cultures throughout time. And so there's, in these centers of diversity, there's just a ton of, or the centers of domestication, there's tons of diversity, cultural diversity, and agricultural and seed diversity as well. And so this is just a map. We don't need to get into too much detail about it, but, you know, for every crop we can imagine, there was a center of origin of that crop, and there was a culture that was able to work with the ecosystem in a way to develop, you know, the species that we survive on today. You know, for example, in North America, we, you know, blueberries and cranberries, sunflowers, tepary beans, and tobacco. You know, so these are in the center of origin. There's a lot of what we call land races, which are diverse varieties of crops that, you know, are evolving to the landscape and the cultures that are stewarding them.
Like Matthew was talking about the land races diversity. It's not just important to have like many varieties of tomatoes or many varieties of beans, but and also it's very important to have a diversity within the population. This is an example of like we have here the different we have diverse population or blue population or green population, and over here we have the different normal temperature, high temperature, and low temperature. When we have a diverse population, we can see in all the temperatures, you kind of have a consistent yield production. But when we can see the blue population, when it's high temperature, the yield gets lost. On the other hand, when the green population, if the temperature goes low, the yield is lost. So it's really important to have a diverse population. So you lost some, but you don't lose all, or you don't lose 50%, you may lose 75%. So just to have a resiliency and sustainability in our production.
So there was a lot of negative information on some of those slides about the consolidation and centralization of things, and you know how that leaves us vulnerable as a society. But you know the good news is you know for potatoes, for example, the center of origin is in the Altiplano of Bolivia and Peru, and there's over 4,000 varieties of potatoes. These are just some images of that diversity. You know, in the United States, currently, close to 70% of our potato production is of one variety, the russet potato. So, you know, we're vulnerable in that sense, but we've got, you know, 4,000 potato varieties that we could potentially access to start increasing the, you know, the diversity of potatoes within, you know, the United States and more specifically within the greater Kansas City area. You know, and once again, the reason for that is that, you know, if we have one variety and it's hit by a disease, we lose the whole thing. If we have hundreds of varieties, we don't encounter that situation. This is kind of just showing it more at a population level. I mean, if you have a genetically diverse population of potatoes, you know, when a fungal infection hits, you know, you only lose 2 of them. You still have 60% of the crop there. If it's genetically identical and it gets hit, you know, you get a complete crop loss.
And there's another example with corn. There's the wild relative of corn, Teosinte, which was domesticated from, and corn was domesticated in southwest of Mexico. And there is around 350 races of corn in the Americas. As you can see, all kind of color, shapes, and sizes. And in the United States, we only grow 10 races. And this is an example of like when we were talking about the diverse population. This is a diverse population which was hit by the corn blight. But like this corn, this size was killed, but the other corn was not. So just again, giving an relevance of diversity.
A banana was domesticated in Southeast Asia, and you can see the bananas on the right side of the screen. The ones with the seeds in them are the kind of the more wild. That's what banana was domesticated from versus, you know, the banana that we're more familiar with today in the supermarket, for example. And so there's upwards of 1,000 banana varieties in the world, and this is kind of a picture of that diversity. And you know, when I look at this, I often wonder what the taste of these are. Now, Nancy, she's been able to explore the taste of some of these, and so not only do you get this idea that you know we become more resilient, but we also have access to different taste. You know, we can use different culinary practices. You know, we can expand as a culture through anchoring into this diversity. You know, the banana variety that we're very familiar with is Cavendish, and you know, majority of the production is off that single variety right now. So, but there's options. You know, there's thousands of varieties that we could potentially tap into as a global community.
And the coffee, like we love everybody coffees, and it was domesticated in Ethiopia and in Africa, and then travel all around the world. And there is known 124 wild species of coffee, but the coffee industry currently only relies on Arabica and Robusta. And like you can imagine, like all these other species, the flavors that can be done, maybe some people right now we don't like, but imagine if you can like some of these other species. So we're really missing, like by just relying in a couple or a few species, uh, great variety of like some people maybe don't like the coffee, but if we tried another variety maybe it's better. So I think like trying to add more diverse on our culinary, I think will be great for everybody.
Okay, so cacao, or more familiar with calling it chocolate, was domesticated in Northwest South America, and there's 15 edible species of cacao and nearly 25,000 accessions that are currently in seed banks around the world. Most of our chocolate production is based off of 10 different varieties. So once again there's a whole plethora of diversity that can be tapped into to make things more resilient.
CGR is a consortium of 15 research centers corresponding to major centers of diversity to conserve and make available around 750 accessions of crops. That's all around 750,000 accessions of crops and trees. That's all around the world for conservation.
So these are major seed banks located around the world that have immense amounts of diversity. Some of the diversity that we've been talking about, for example.
And they are around 1,700 gene banks holding collections of seeds for conservation. There is diversity that's kept there that we can access and grow it on a landscape and get access to more diversity of beans of any crops that we want. And there is the global seed bank that is in Norway, who have over 980,000 samples of seeds from almost every country they're holding for conservation or for later use.
And so the thing is these seed banks are good, and they kind of store biodiversity. Currently, a lot of this stuff is only accessed by plant breeders that are kind of breeding monoculture lines that are then going to be released into the industrial agricultural system. But this is not all that they're for. And so there are ways for our community to, for example, access this diversity. And there's over this is just a website. It's called Genesis, and there's over 4 million varieties that we can access from this system alone, that is from all these seed banks and gene banks around the world. And so, for example, if you look kind of in the middle here, about halfway down, maize, there's over 100,000 varieties of maize that can be accessed, that we could source and bring into the region if we so desire to do so.
And there is, like, as a community, we're doing here, creating a resilient community and more diverse. And around the world, there is 500 million smallholder farms who are working and preserving diversity of different crops, potatoes, cotton. And I think like we are really not alone, more like we are joined to this worldwide community.
Yeah, so and we're joining a very strong global community as we continue to transform agriculture here in Kansas City. And it's very important for us to realize that we're not some little isolated island, but that we're connected with thousands of years of cultural evolution that predate the development of industrial agricultural systems. And we're part of a community that has stewarded and domesticated an immense amount of diversity, and they continue to practice agricultural ways that respect the earth, that respect you know, the life on the planet. And, you know, and so this is what we're anchoring into, you know, and this is often, you know, unheard of, that, you know, we think that, you know, industrial agriculture is kind of what's feeding everything, but there's these massive networks of farmers, you know, 500 million farms, you know, smallholder farms. I mean, this is quite quite extreme. So, you know, when we're talking about, so today, you know, in this presentation, what we've done is we've gone through and we've basically, you know, said that diversity is a key component of resiliency, that resiliency is a cornerstone of sustainability. And if we're trying to reform our agricultural system here in Greater Kansas City into this kind of a, you know, sustainable situation, diversity is going to be a key component of that. And, you know, we've talked about what happens if you do not have diversity within your systems and how that leaves us vulnerable. And that's not what we're shooting for. You know, in Kansas City, there's been a lot of great effort. Yes, there's been a lot of great effort to, you know, to start making, you know, our food system more localized and more sustainable. And, you know, as we continue to do that as a community, you know, it's essential that we access diversity and we integrate diversity into that. So, and then we, you know, we also discussed that, you know, there's a way for us to access such diversity and to start integrating it into the further development of our you know, local agricultural system. And the other important point that has helped Nancy and I out is, you know, we contribute to our community in this process of moving things forward into, you know, something that we all can be a part of, that we take pride in, a system that we're, you know, a part of and that we can contribute to. You know, at times it can feel very isolating, you know, as we begin to form these things. But, you know, this idea that there's 500 million, you know, smallholder farms around the world that, you know, in communities across the globe that are doing this, you know, this is a very comforting thing, you know, as we embark further on this journey. I think that it's very important for us to, you know, consider that and remember that, you know.
And I think like a kind of like making a last point is seed, I think, is like the link, or like that part that kind of closes the cycle of a community that would be resilient. I think like as a community, we should save seeds. And I think like that's very important, and then share seeds. And the other thing is like for our seeds to be more diverse, I think it's very important to learn how to use them, because like it's coming a lot of like new crops, they're coming, and we generally don't know how to use them. One example we have, or I have, is like with the cowpeas. When the first time I grew it, I didn't know what to do with them, because I didn't grow up with cowpeas. Matthew didn't grow up with cowpeas, but the cowpeas love this weather, and you can grow them like any color, shapes, and size, and then learning how to share those seeds, and then also to share the recipes, and everybody start exploring how to use them. I think it's like a very important for us as a community to be able to not just like grow something, but then also share. And I think seed, it's really just like kind of closes that gap, that we start on spring, and then we have patience enough to wait until fall to harvest the seed, and then have winter to share with our community. And I think like that is really important, just bringing diversity to the community of Kansas City.
Yeah, and you know, with that kind of cultural development or transformation that, you know, Nancy's speaking of, is, you know, just at the heart of community development. And, you know, as we further develop this, it's not only important that we have that seed diversity and that kind of food culture, and, you know, really kind of start anchoring, you know, recipes and music and all this kind of stuff around the essence of the development of our, you know, food system and community, that we also, you know, think about cultural diversity, right? I mean, in Kansas City, we're very culturally diverse. And so, you know, the same concepts that we're talking about at the seed level and at the food level is very relevant and important to, you know, how we, you know, develop our community, right? So, you know, difference and diversity is, it's a, you know, this is a, I'll go ahead and call it a universal principle. So if you stay in line with such a principle like this, things work out well. So as we develop, you know, continue developing, it's very important for us to, you know, be inclusive of others that might have differing viewpoints, right? So if we have 1,000 viewpoints and they're all slightly different, yeah, it might be a headache to talk it out. But when we do talk it out, we're going to come up with the greatest solution. So it's, you know, we're firm believers as well that, you know, that all voices be brought to the table, as well as, you know, as we continue to develop this culture that we're developing as a community right now. So. Yeah, so I think that ends what we wanted to say. And if there's any questions, we, you know, or discussion or topics or anything, I think we still got a fair amount of time. So we'd be open to going down that road if that works.
Yeah, like we still have 19 minutes. So if anyone wants to log their questions, just put them in the Q&A. Don Wise says that he loves the idea of the principles of diversity. So I had a question. Was what does, like, since the year's closer to being over than not, like what does 2021 look like for you two in terms of realizing these values of diversity? And, you know, like you have the seed company. What's on your horizons?
Yeah, did you want to start out or?
Sure. 2021 looks like more diversity. Well, I think like we're thinking of really bringing more. I think like in 2020 we did grow quite amount of diversity, and as of right now we are. I mean, it's really a lot of work, but then also we are thinking on start bringing. For example, we have biennials, which it's going to be our first year, like carrots. We have some turnips, beets that right now we are storing them, and then like I think in 2021 we'll be able to see varieties that the land raises that. For example, we have one carrot that tastes like a pineapple, and you will never think. I really never imagined when we harvest those carrots and we were like tasting, because we're trying to also like, because they look different than the normal carrots that we normally buy, or they're accessed in different seed companies. And when we got these ones, they're big, they're kind of like hairy, and we were like kind of like, oh, they really don't look like a kind of like a. So we start kind of tasting, and there was one like it was really like a pineapple. And we have our kids who are out testing too, and they were like, really, well, like, where did this pineapple come from? And we're like, it's not pineapple, it's carrots. So I think like right now that's like in the horizon of 2021, replanting them and start getting hopefully good amount of seeds so we can share with the community.
Yeah, so I think this year we probably had you know, maybe 15 varieties of carrots, you know, that did pretty well. And so a question that often arises with this kind of thing is, you know, how do you source diversity that's going to work here, right? Because there's a lot of diversity that's just not going to work in this location, meaning it's not going to grow, so on and so forth. So I've you know, we've integrated basically where we can take the climate here, you know, different parameters such as precipitation and high temperature, low temperature, and so on and so forth. And then we can project that the climate here across the world, right? So we can find different locations in the world that match this climate. And then we can access, you know, some of these seed banks, and they have collection information. So for instance, if there's a region in Afghanistan that matches the climate here, we can access, you know, seeds from that location, and then it's highly probable that they'll grow here. And it's, so we're kind of expanding that identification approach to where we can access more varieties. And, you know, we're trying to integrate with the community on any level we can. Obviously things have been a bit challenging now, but we also next year hope to expand and start working with some local chefs to, you know, start integrating some of these ingredients and start to develop, you know, that taste palette in the region, and, you know, just continue to network and explore opportunities with the community as well. Go ahead, hon. So yeah, Don says, if I want to save and share seeds, what volume is helpful to save and share? You know, it's often like right now, you know, just as a company, but we grow fairly small amounts of, you know, we're not getting pounds and pounds of seeds. And I think that question, you know, it's relevant to think, you know, are we going to share with other farmers? Or are we going to share with, you know, gardeners? And like, how large is our network of people that we aim to share with? But for example, you know, with carrots, you know, if you had a row of, you know, 15 feet of carrots, you know, your second year, the amount of seed production you would get would be immense. So it often depends on what the crop is, but you know, within a small garden plot, for example, one can grow enough seeds to share with, you know, tens to maybe hundreds of people. So it's very crop specific, but it doesn't necessarily need to be that we're growing, you know, 10 acres of corn, for example. So it's definitely variable on that. So is there Don Wise also asks, is there a local network with which I should connect? You know, we've interacted with Seed Savers KC is a, you know, a network that's been going for quite a while. It appears to us to be a little bit more focused in on gardening, which is good as well. And you know, I think as we kind of interact more with the farming community in the region, you know, hopefully we can work with, you know, Seed Savers KC and kind of expand that, you know, so we're not redundant. You know, there's already been this great effort in the community with that network. So, you know, if there's ways that we can, you know, continue to develop that into the farming system to where, you know, there's sharing and saving of seeds that, you know, can be produced on a level that we can then, you know, provide food to the community and things like this. So yeah, go.
And then I think the other thing I want to say about like seeds, most of the seeds, like for example, we sell, they can be saved, and that's ultimate our goal. The community can save their own seeds. They're not hybrids, they're open pollinated land races that you can save as much as you want and share with as many as you want. And usually also, like I say, as a company, like we kind of give donation to different organizations, especially to the like school gardens with locally adapted seeds. But I think like what Don Wise was saying about like sometimes like just save seeds and you can trade. Like if somebody has somebody, I think like there is a group on Facebook, like the Kansas City Gardening. They do a lot of trading of local seeds. Like if you need something, I can trade you with this. So there are networks in the community to trade seeds. Now there's another question.
Yeah, go ahead, sweetie.
Oh, Craig Boland says consumers are trained to think banana looks one way, for example. How do we educate them to all the other types that could become available?
Good question.
That is a big question. And usually, like, I think as a humans, we kind of like, even myself, I try to open myself as much as I can, but we just have the, like, yeah, I think like it's on everybody. Basically, I think we are responsible. And whenever I go to buy something, I always try to look like for something that is different, but then also something that is fair to the environment and to the social conscious. Now, like in a big because I think like I came from Bolivia, and like the first time I saw a pink banana, or like there's these little tiny yellow bananas, it was, I think, probably when I was 10. And I remember my mom bought, and we were trying a big, we did not want to eat the banana because we wanted the normal banana. But when we tried as a little kids, that was just like the best bananas you could ever have. So I think like train, I really don't have a recipe how you can train to people to just like, I think like one as a single person as of the society have to put their little grain uh, of sand to build this more diversity, you know, like, because if we keep buying the same thing, the market is not going to switch. But if we start demanding new things, they will change. You have anything else to say that?
Yeah, and I think like Nancy was saying earlier, a lot of it, comes into development of recipes, and I mean not specifically for bananas, but potentially for bananas, developing of various recipes. So for example, if Nancy's got a good recipe for a certain type of cowpea, and everybody else around is like, we don't know what to do with cowpeas, but she's got a delicious dish that she is able to share with the community at a potluck, or just friends and family and so on and so forth. This is the other way. So there's got to be the utility of the diversity as well, and the utility means that we eat it. So, and another component is local food restaurants and things like this, chefs being able to take ingredients and start tailoring them and so on and so forth. So it you know delicious dishes, I think, is really quite key. And a lot of the communities that domesticated these crops, and where there's an immense amount of diversity you see in these regions, there's recipes for everything. And Nancy, maybe you could speak quickly about your grandfather and the potatoes that he grew, and how those certain dishes were anchored into that production. I think that that's helpful here.
Yeah, I think I grew up in growing potatoes and llamas, and we used to have like, for example, potatoes for every dish. Like if you wanna if you wanna eat soup, there is soup. And then, like for example, if you're gonna use a fresh meat with some type of soup, there is a potato for it. And if you wanna like just eat potato, just boiled potatoes, we had at least 5 varieties I remember. You just boil them and you don't need anything else, because the flavor, the texture is just perfect. And then if you want to eat with cheese, there is for these different varieties. So and when I was growing up, like you grew up in a certain environment and you just think like that's normal. I moved to Costa Rica and there is no potato production there. I think like I suffered for 3 years trying to find where the potato was grown, and I think finally I found like a little internship for 2 weeks, and that freshness of potatoes, it was for me, was just like I was on the heaven, even though it was just one variety. There was no different varieties. So it's and I think like as of right now, like since we met with Matthew, I always been trying to add potatoes, and we are start growing here potatoes in trying to create different dishes. For example, like I'm trying to, for example, work like what other varieties can replace russet for French fries, because everybody, we love French fries. I love French fries. So trying to find different varieties of potatoes that could replace that variety, so we can reduce basically the consumption of russet, which that will give to the industry a little hit, like, okay, we need to start finding another varieties. Okay.
Yeah, thanks, Craig. And I think one thing's, for if anybody else wants to chime in, like we were saying earlier, it's all about everybody's perspectives. We each have our own little pieces of information that maybe combined, leads to some type of answer. So, does anybody else have any, comments or thoughts or anything like that?
I guess I'd ask, do you have like a personal like greatest success story with either finding new varieties or breaking through people, a sort of palate breakthrough where people experience a new taste or a new flavor that made it all
Yeah, so one variety that comes to mind for me is um, when I was working at Cultivate Kansas City, there over at Juniper Garden Training Farm, there was there were a lot of there was probably around 16 different farmers, and many of them from different parts of the world, and many of them grew a winter squash, but there are different types of winter squashes. And so winter squash is it's an outcrossing species, meaning that if you grow them in close proximity to other varieties, they end up cross pollinating. So you ended up having maybe 10 or 12 of those farmers in that area that had different winter squash. And at the end of the season, there was a woman, a friend of ours, that was a farmer there that came up to me and presented me a winter squash. It was a great gift. It was the end of the season. She came up and she said, "Here, this is for you and your family." And so this winter squash, we brought it home, and we had a number of them. This one we stored it for a while, and we ended up not cutting into it, Nancy, for over a year.
Mm-hmm.
So it's stored for over a year, first off, which is pretty amazing. But we ended up cutting it open and making dishes with it. And we took the seeds and planted them the following year. And out of that group of seeds came out like 100 different 100 different forms of squash. So, and it was because they were all cross pollinated. So we had this diverse population of squash that was grown by refugee farmers here in Kansas City. And we were like, what are we going to call it? We're going to call it America, because we find this to be a great representation of what we see as America. So diverse dish and so on, or diverse crop, anyway, so this variety, it was very magical to us. The taste was just phenomenal. The texture was phenomenal. And so we decided that we were going to integrate, work with some local chefs. And I think we ended up, we probably sold a couple 100 pounds maybe of this squash to local chefs. And then they started making, doing their magic and making different dishes and so on and so forth. And so that was a very magical variety that, and it was one of the first varieties that we really started trying to see if there were ways that we could network with chefs to not only get this delicious variety out to the people, but also to start presenting the ideas that we stand for as far as diversity. So a lot of the chefs were able to say, this is where this variety came from. This is what it stands for. The name of it is America, and so on and so forth. So it was kind of one of those fusions that seemed to be pretty deep to us as far as starting to move things toward acceptance in the community.
Yep.
How about you? What was your favorite crop so far that we've grown?
I think America too, because
Yeah.
I made a pie and I don't really need to put much sugar on it. And I one of my focus on cooking, especially with kids, is reduce the amount of sugar I use. And I try to replace a lot of with honey. I think last year when I made I was working like I don't know for how many times. With like putting some cream cheese, but then put some American winter squash. That one was just like delicious, and like for not putting too much sugar, I think for me is very important. And so, yeah, it's one of my favorites. And like after that, I don't think I use any more pumpkin pie.
Right, yeah, pumpkin, using regular pie pumpkins after using winter squash, it's hard to do because the texture is just so much richer with America.
Yeah, it's kind of creamy that like when you're especially when you're baking or when you're cooking, I put in some in the soups. I just salted some of them. It was really just like and even the chefs, I think they really like it too. So it was really good.
Awesome. Well,
Okay.
we should conclude this panel. Thank you very much to our speakers and to everyone that attended.
Yeah, thank you guys. You guys have a good day.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Spencer.
Yeah. Hope to see you around.
Yep.